Hi, this is Simon, and this is a video about clean sample editing. Sample editing is an important part of the digital composition or digital production process because, at least in part, samples are going to be our building blocks. We're going to be looping them, we're going to be layering them, we're going to be manipulating them, maybe time stretching them. So a little bit of extra time spent making sure your samples are cleanly edited is going to save you a bunch of time down the road. To start, here's my subjective definition of a cleanly edited sample. It's worth noting that I'm thinking about these as samples that we're going to be editing to load into a sampler or to be digitally manipulated in a software like Max, Chemo, or Reactor. So a cleanly edited sample does not have extraneous time before or after your sound. It doesn't truncate your sound. It starts and ends with an amplitude of exactly 0. In this case, we'll want to normalize it so all your samples will have the same amplitude. Your sample should contain no clipping or other distortion. I'm not going to get into it in this video, but you should also clearly name your samples to help you distinguish what they are. One of the guiding principles that I have is that each digital process you're going to apply to your sample is going to reduce its fidelity. So we want to do as few things as possible, and we want to avoid repeating steps. Every process that we apply, we want it to be improving the sound of our sample. So what I'm going to be doing from here on out in this video is I'm going to explain a possible workflow and my reasoning behind it. I'm going to go through an example in Adobe Audition, and I'm going to go through an example in Audacity. This video isn't intended to be a tutorial for those softwares. These ideas that we're talking about can be applied to any waveform editor. And as I always tell my students, learn concepts, not software. So here's my proposed workflow. Step 1 is optional. If you've made a recording that's very, very quiet, you can normalize it if you need to do so just to hear your samples. Once you can hear it, decide which take that you're going to want to turn into your sample. Start by trimming it loosely and then trim it tightly. We want to make sure that we trim it tightly enough that, for example, if it's a percussive sample, it's going to start immediately when we trigger it. Also, we want to avoid as much room noise as possible before and after the sample, as that'll be stacking up if we start layering this sample. Once we've trimmed, then is the time to do our cleanup that we might want to do. I'm not going to do any of that in this video, but I include fixing sub-audio, DC offset, doing compression EQ if you want to. Again, every process that you apply is going to reduce the fidelity of your sample. So make sure that each process you apply improves your sound. If your sample isn't already normalized when you're done with the cleanup, it's a good time to normalize it again. And then we do our fade-ins and fade-outs. It's very important that we start and end exactly at 0. Of course, this is a good way to avoid audible pops, but also if we're working with different digital systems, they might not behave properly if we don't have our samples all go exactly to 0. For example, if you're working in a custom designed game audio system, there's the possibility that not starting and ending at 0 can cause issues. So it's worthwhile for us to spend the time and make sure we're there. After you do your fade in, fade out, zoom in to double check your fades. The algorithms for fades in both Audition and Audacity sometimes don't have the final sample of the file exactly at 0, so we need to zoom in and double check. Finally, we need to export or save our file, and we need to think about the settings of those. So here I am in Audition. Even if you know you're going to be editing in Audacity, please bear with me and watch this part since I'm going to talk about some more details of our workflow in this example. The reason that I'm in this video using Audacity and Audition is because these are waveform editors. Waveform editors are designed for the detailed editing of single wave files, whereas software like Pro Tools, Reaper, or Logic is for multi-track production. Since we're making individual samples, a waveform editor is likely a better tool for the job. You can see here I've got a left and a right recording, but there's only recorded information in the left track. So we're going to have the additional step of just isolating that left side. Let's jump over to our workflow, okay? Normalize if necessary. So looking at our waveform here, these are pretty quiet, but I believe I'm going to be able to hear these loud enough for editing. Let's try it. I can hear those well enough to work with them, so I'm not going to do that initial step of normalizing here. I am going to select the take. We have a whole bunch of takes here. We'll just sort of give a cursory examination. I think I like number 2 here. Let's do that one. I'm going to actually click on that right there, and that deselects that right channel. And then I can select that one part. This is now in my step 3, trim loosely. So instead of trimming here, I'm actually going to copy this. So I would go Command C, but I'll do it the long way here. Copy, and then I'll make a new file. We want a new audio file, not a multi-track session. Again, so this would be Shift Command N. And then it's going to ask me some information. What do I want to do? I actually want a mono file. Bit depth, let's match what we have here. And so we can see that this is 24 bits, 44.1. So let's keep that at 24. We'll change this one to 44.1. And then we'll call this bottle low. And then, again, I would go Command V, but let's just go here long form and paste. Here it is. Let's listen. Now it's in mono file, so we hear it in both left and right. Still, we're at this trim loosely step of the process. So let's continue to trim a little bit loosely here. And the reason we trim loosely before we try to do our tight trim is you can see every time I trim it, I get a more zoomed in version of my waveform, so it's easier for me to see. I've just selected that beginning. I'm about to delete it, but I'm going to hit space once to see if that actually has any of the sound I want in it. Let's listen. There might be a little bit of something in there. I'm going to do a little bit of vertical zoom. I'm holding down Option and hitting plus. I don't think that's sound that we need, so I'm actually going to delete that. And then let's do a similar thing with the end here. Definitely, there's still some sound left in that. At this point, it's a little bit more dubious, so I'm going to delete that. Option minus to zoom it back down. Let's have a look at what we've done so far. We've selected our tape, we've trimmed it loosely, and now we've trimmed it tightly. Clean up if necessary. I'm not going to do that in this. There's also an argument to do this after normalization, especially if you're playing with dynamic effects. But you normalize, then, for example, then you EQ boost, you're going to get clipping. You normalize and then you do something that's going to drastically reduce the gain, then you won't have a normalized sample. So I'm just going to follow this. So I'm not going to clean up. Let's normalize again if necessary. This isn't really again because I haven't done it before. I'm just going to do Command A to select the whole thing. You can do that under Edit too. And then normalize is under favorites here. It doesn't really matter which you normalize to unless you have a specific request, but you need to be consistent, otherwise you're not normalized at all. All right, there we go. That looks like it's clipping, but it's just because I'm zoomed, right? So there we go. Significantly louder. Okay. Now let's have a look at what's next. Our fade in and fade out. Okay, so we're not trying to make musical effects with these. We want to just make sure that the sound comes in and out in a way that we like. I'm actually going to zoom in a bit. I'm just hitting plus here without holding down Option for my horizontal zoom. And then I'm just going to take a little bit here. You can see this is just a fraction of a second that I'm doing my fade for. We'll do a fade in there. And then I can zoom back out here. You can sort of start to hear the noise get louder than the sample. And then I will fade out, again, both under favorites. Listen to the whole thing. I think that's sounding pretty good. We might trust that those fades are successful, but we want to make sure we're beginning and ending at precisely 0. And we have to zoom in to look at things at the sample level for that. So, for example, we'll look at the beginning and we'll start by doing our horizontal zoom. Okay, this is all well and good. Now we can start to see these dots. These dots are the individual digital samples. Here it looks like it's at 0, but we haven't done any vertical zoom yet. So I'm going to hold down Option. I'm going to start zooming, and here we go. This is the very, very beginning. These are the first 3 samples here of our file. It looks like the line here isn't at 0, but the line actually doesn't matter. What matters is the dot. And so that dot is telling us that this digital sample at the beginning of the file is at exactly 0, which is what we want. Let's now go and check out the end of the file. Okay. So we can see here that this sample did not quite make it to 0 in our fades. There are a couple of ways to fix this. I could keep doing fades over and over again, but this is so close to the 0 axis that I can just select literally this last sample, right? So this is a selection of 3 samples. This is just the very last sample here, and I can change it into silence. Effects, silence, boom. And that's just changed that very last sample to be exactly 0. Let's listen again. All right. And then we can zoom back out. Okay. We've done our fades. We've zoomed in to double check our fades. And now we need to export or save considering settings. In this case, we're saving with Audition. The reason is Audition is a destructive editor. We don't want dither, but we don't have to add any dither because we've been working here in 24-bit. We're going to export this as a 24-bit file, and so there won't be any dither involved in the process. So if I just go to Save, Bottle Blow, put it on my desktop, wave format is fine, 100, mono 24-bit, and then we hit OK. Boom. Here we go. Here it is loaded in a sampler. Sounds pretty good. All right, here I am in Audacity. A lot of people like to use Audacity because it's a free software. You can just get it online, and I think it's actually quite good for what we want to do here. So once again, I have a stereo file with information in one track. The way I deal with that here is I'm going to split this stereo track, and then I'm going to close 1/2, leaving just that single channel. So now with that done, let's select our take. I like 3 and 4 both there, but I like something about how 4 has that longer sound, so I'm going to choose that one. Okay. By the way, without even mentioning it, I started to do my trim loosely. In this case, I'm actually trimming the file rather than copying and pasting it. Command 1 now is my horizontal zoom in. I'm just going to continue to trim. This is very safe trimming right now. Here's a question as to whether this part here is where the sound starts, or this is where the sound starts. Let's start by just listening to what this is. It's a little bit of an initial breath sound. That'll probably be a matter of preference, but I think I like that, so I'm going to keep that in. So I'm going to continue to sort of trim loosely, Command 1 to zoom in, and then I'm just going to trim that almost. Yeah, I like that. Boom. And now Command 3 zooms out. Let's see about the end of this. Definitely some sound in that. A little bit of sound in that. I could probably even... I could go pretty close to the end there. So let's just select that. And I'm not going to trim anymore, but I'm going to start doing my fades. By the way, I'm skipping here So I trimmed loosely, trimmed tightly. I almost got ahead of myself and did the fade before the normalize. And actually, I'm going to do that just to show you why I have that order in the way I do. So let me do my fade out here. Go back to the beginning. Since this is our initial breath sound, I actually don't want to cut off any of that. So I'm going to zoom a little bit closer in there. I'm just going to really put my fade just at the very, very beginning. In fact, fade in. Audacity is a little bit harder to zoom in vertically. We have to use this menu. So what I've done is I've gone to the ruler here and I've right-clicked on that. If you don't have a right click, you can control click. So zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. To my knowledge, there's no way to do this faster. If you know a way to do it, then by all means, please let me know. It looks like we've done pretty good here at the beginning. It looks like that sample's right at 0. Let's hop along to the end. This actually looks like those fades did pretty good. As I say in here, we want to zoom in to double check. Sometimes they might be okay, but it's worth us spending the time to do that zoom and find out. All right, so now let's normalize it. Command A to select all of it. Effect, normalize. Just gonna say okay. All right, so something bad has happened here. Let's zoom reset. Okay, still it looks fine there. Let's start our process of zooming in again. So we can see that these samples are no longer ending exactly at 0. Let's go back and look at our beginning. Also here, it's not ending at 0. What's happened here is something particular in Audacity. If I go to normalize, you'll notice that it's actually applying multiple processes at the same time. It's doing the DC offset and normalizing the amplitudes. So this is why, especially with Audacity, it's important to do these in the order. You want to do your normalization before you do your fades, because extra processing after you do your fades can lead to your beginning and ends not ending exactly at 0. So this is why I bring up this workflow. How do we fix this? Well, let me undo it first of all. So I've just undid that normalized, and you can see now I begin and end exactly at 0. Let me try normalizing without removing the DC offset. Might be okay there. I think I'm zoomed in as far as I can go. That one looks like it's at 0. We can maybe take a quick peek. Yeah, that looks good to me. Go to the beginning. Okay, I think we've got it. That said, we know that that sample has a little bit of DC offset problems. Okay, export or save. Now, with Audacity, we don't want to save, because if we save it, we're saving it as an Audacity project. We actually want to export this. We want to export it as uncompressed audio here, so wave. And then we get this menu. And then I get to choose the kind. I could save it as an AFF file, or I can save it as a WAV file. Let's do a 24-bit recording. In Audacity, we're always working in 32-bit float. So even though the sample that we brought in was originally 24 bits, we've been working in 32-bit float, which means that it's going to reduce the bit depth when it exports. So I want to check one thing. Because we're reducing the bit depth, it is going to think about adding dither. I have here dither set to none for both of these. So I don't want to add dither. You know, there is a bit of a debate as to whether truncation error, quantization error is worse than dither. I don't want to deal with that right now. I just want to think about the fact that if I'm adding low-level noise, just as that DC offset set me apart from being exactly at 0, that low-level noise could set me away from being exactly 0. And again, if I'm going to use this as a sample, likely dither is going to be applied somewhere later in my process. So I'm going to turn dither off for this sample editing. Let's go back there, export as wave, 24-bit, and now this one is trumpet, and I'll put that on the desktop. It's going to ask me for metadata. I never do that. So now let's give it a shot. Back in Reactor, take my sample, let's replace it with the trumpet. Just quickly do that.